He looked at her name tag, then at her scuffed shoes, and sneered. To Harrison Sterling, the waitress standing before him wasn't a person. She was a prop in his play of wealth and dominance. He thought that by switching to an obscure, aristocratic dialect of French, he could strip her of her dignity in front of his date. He thought he was the smartest person in the room. He was wrong. He didn't know that the woman holding his menu wasn't just a waitress, and the few words she was about to speak would not only silence the table, but dismantle his entire life. This is the story of how arrogance met its match. The air inside l'Orangerie, Manhattan's most ostentatious French bistro, smelled of truffle oil, expensive perfume, and old money. For Sarah Bennett, however, it mostly smelled of exhaustion. Sarah adjusted the waistband of her black slacks, which were a size too big, and held up by a safety pin hidden beneath her crisp white apron. It was 8:15 p.m. on a Friday. The dinner rush was hitting its peak, a cacophony of clinking crystal and the low, dull roar of conversations that cost more per minute than Sarah made in a week. Table 4 needs water. Table 7 wants to send the sea bass back because it looks sad. Move, Bennett, move. The hiss came from Charles Henderson, the floor manager. Henderson was a man who believed that sweating was a sign of incompetence. He was currently hovering near the host stand, wiping an imaginary smudge off a leather-bound menu. "On it, Charles," Sarah said, keeping her head down. She grabbed a carafe of iced water, ignoring the sharp, stabbing pain in her left arch. She had been on her feet for 9 hours. Her shoes, generic non-slips, bought from a discount store in Queens, were disintegrating. Sarah Bennett was 26 years old. To the patrons of l'Orangerie, she was a silhouette in black and white. She was the hand that refilled the wine, the voice that recited the specials, and the object that absorbed their complaints. They didn't see the dark circles she carefully concealed with drugstore concealer. They certainly didn't know that 3 years ago, Sarah had been a doctoral candidate in comparative linguistics at the Sorbonne in Paris, one of the brightest minds in her cohort before the phone call came. The accident, her father's stroke, the medical bills that swallowed their savings like a sinkhole. She had left Paris overnight. She traded the library for the lecture hall for the noisy dining room. She did what she had to do to keep her father in the care facility upstate. "Sarah," Henderson snapped again. "VIPs walking in. Table 1. Best view. Don't mess this up." Sarah looked toward the heavy oak doors. The host, a trembling teenager named Kevin, was bowing lightly as a couple entered. The man walked in first, which told Sarah everything she needed to know. He was tall, wearing a navy bespoke suit that fit him a little too tightly across the shoulders, as if to emphasize his gym routine. He had the kind of face that was handsome in a magazine, but cruel in motion, sharp jaw eyes that scanned the room to see who was watching him. This was Harrison Sterling. Sarah recognized the name from the credit card receipts. Harrison was a hedge fund manager who had made headlines recently, not for his returns, but for his aggressive, hostile takeovers. He was new money trying desperately to look like old money. Trailing behind him was a woman who looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. She was stunning, wearing a deep red dress, but her posture was closed off. Her arms crossed defensively. This was Jessica, though Sarah didn't know her name yet. Jessica looked nervous. "Right this way, Monsieur Sterling," Kevin squeaked. Harrison didn't acknowledge the boy. He strode to table 1, the prime spot by the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city lights. He sat down, spreading his legs wide, claiming the space. Sarah took a deep breath. She smoothed her apron. Just get through the shift, she told herself. Rent is due Tuesday. Dad needs his physical therapy. She walked over to the table, her face composed into the mask of pleasant servitude she wore like armor. "Good evening," Sarah said, her voice soft and professional. "Welcome to l'Orangerie. My name is Sarah, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Harrison didn't look up. He was busy inspecting the silverware, turning a fork over in the light to check for spots. "Sparkling water," Harrison said to the fork, "and bring the wine list, the reserve list, not the one you give the tourists." "Of course, sir," Sarah said. She glanced at the woman. "And for you, miss," Jessica offered a small, apologetic smile. "Just still water, please." "Thank you." Harrison finally looked up. His eyes landed on Sarah. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her cheap shoes, then up to her hands, which were red from handling hot plates. A sneer curled his lip. He had identified her status in the hierarchy of his world zero. "Wait," Harrison said, just as Sarah turned to leave. "Yes, sir." "Make sure the glass is actually clean this time," he said, loud enough for the neighboring table to hear. "Last time I was here, the stemware was foggy. It's hard to get good help these days, isn't it?" Sarah felt a flush of heat rise up her neck, but she forced her expression to remain blank. "I will personally inspect the glasses, sir." "You do that?" He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, like swatting a fly. As she walked away, she heard him laugh, a dry, barking sound. He leaned in toward Jessica. "You have to be firm with them, Jess. Otherwise they walk all over you. It's a power dynamic. You wouldn't understand." Sarah reached the service station, her hands trembling slightly. She gripped the counter. "He's a nightmare," whispered Tonya, the bartender, as she polished a glass. "He tipped 5% last time and tried to get the valet fired because it was raining." "I can handle him," Sarah said, though a knot of dread was tightening in her stomach. She had handled rude customers before. But there was something about Harrison Sterling, a predatory glint in his eyes that suggested he was bored. And men like Harrison Sterling, when bored, liked to play games with people they considered beneath them. 20 minutes later, the atmosphere at Table 1 had shifted from tense to suffocating. Sarah approached with the appetizers. She balanced the heavy tray on one shoulder, her posture perfect despite the ache in her spine. She placed the foie gras au torchon in front of Harrison and the salade lyonnaise in front of Jessica. "Enjoy," she murmured, turning to refill their wine glasses. She had brought a 2015 Chateau Margaux, a bottle that cost more than her father's monthly care. Harrison held up a hand, stopping her from pouring. He swirled the wine already in his glass, sniffing it ostentatiously. "It's corked," he announced. Sarah paused. She knew wine. She had smelled the cork herself when she opened it at the station. It was pristine. The wine was perfect. "I apologize, sir," Sarah said gently. "I opened it myself just moments ago. Perhaps it needs a moment to breathe." Harrison slammed his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. The restaurant went quiet for a heartbeat. Jessica flinched. "Are you arguing with me?" Harrison asked, his voice raising an octave. "I said it's corked. Do you know who I am? Do you know how much wine I buy? I don't need a waitress with, what is that, a Queen's accent, telling me about Bordeaux." He wasn't just complaining. He was performing. He was trying to assert dominance in front of Jessica, trying to look like a connoisseur by belittling the staff. "I will fetch the sommelier immediately, sir," Sarah said, her voice tight. "No." Harrison smiled, a cruel, thin expression. Don't bother the sommelier. He's busy with important tables. You can take this back. And bring me the menu again. I've lost my appetite for the foie gras. It looks rubbery. Sarah took the plate. She took the wine. She walked back to the kitchen, her face burning. In the kitchen, the chef, a large man named Henri, who actually was French, dipped a spoon into the returned sauce. Rubbery. This man is an imbecile. The texture is perfect. He's putting on a show, Sarah said, leaning against the stainless steel counter. He wants a reaction. Don't give him one, Henri warned. Henderson is watching. If Sterling makes a scene, Henderson will fire you to save face. We all know it. Sarah nodded. She couldn't lose this job. She needed the tips from tonight. She returned to the table with the menus. Harrison was leaning back, looking pleased with himself. Jessica looked miserable. I'm sorry about him, Jessica mouthed silently to Sarah when Harrison looked away to check his watch. Sarah gave a tiny nod of acknowledgement. So, Harrison said, opening the menu without looking at it. He stared directly at Sarah. I feel like something authentic tonight. But reading this English description is so boring. It lacks the soul of the dish. He smirked. Tell me, do you speak French? This is a French restaurant, is it not? I know the menu items, sir, Sarah said. The menu items, he mocked. Bonjour, baguette, oui, oui. That's about the extent of it for someone like you, I assume. Sarah bit the inside of her cheek. I can help you with any questions you have, sir. I doubt it. Harrison laughed. He looked at Jessica. Watch this, babe. You can always tell the quality of an establishment by the education of the staff. He turned back to Sarah, his eyes gleaming with malice. He took a breath and switched languages. But he didn't just speak French. He spoke a rapid-fire, overly florid and archaic version of French, peppered with slang that he likely picked up from a semester abroad or a pretentious tutor. He was trying to be difficult on purpose. Écoutez-moi, ma petite. Harrison sneered, his accent thick and exaggerated heavy on the guttural R's. Je veux que vous disiez au chef que je veux le canard, mais seulement si la peau est croustillante comme du verre. Et apportez-moi un autre vin, quelque chose qui ne goûte pas le vinaigre. Comprenez-vous? Ou est-ce que je parle trop vite pour ton petit cerveau? Translation. Listen to me, my little one. I want you to tell the chef I want the duck, but only if the skin is crispy like glass. And bring me another wine, something that doesn't taste like vinegar. Do you understand? Or am I speaking too fast for your little brain? He sat back, crossing his arms, a smug grin plastered on his face. He waited for the blank stare. He waited for her to stammer to say, I'm sorry I don't understand, so he could roll his eyes and demand a manager who spoke the language of civilization. Jessica looked down at her lap, humiliated on Sarah's behalf. Harrison, stop it. Just order in English. No, no. Harrison chuckled, keeping his eyes on Sarah. It's standard. If she works here, she should know. Look at her. She's completely lost. It's pathetic, really. Probably wondering if I asked for ketchup. Sarah stood perfectly still. The sounds of the restaurant faded away. She looked at Harrison Sterling, a man who thought money bought intelligence, who thought a suit bought class. She remembered the lecture halls of the Sorbonne. She remembered her thesis on the evolution of aristocratic dialects in 18th century France. She remembered the long nights debating philosophy in cafes in the Latin Quarter, with professors who had forgotten more about language than Harrison would ever know. She looked at his smug face. The exhaustion in her feet seemed to vanish, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He wanted a show. She would give him one. She didn't reach for her notepad. She didn't call for Henderson. She simply clasped her hands in front of her apron, tilted her head slightly, and locked eyes with him. The silence at the table stretched for 3 seconds. Harrison's smile began to falter just slightly. He expected confusion. He didn't expect the icy calm that settled over the waitress's face. Then Sarah opened her mouth. Sarah did not blink. She did not stammer. She adjusted her posture, shifting her weight so that she stood tall, looming slightly over the seated billionaire. When she spoke, the tone of her voice changed completely. Gone was the flat, subservient monotone of the American waitress. In its place was the rich, resonant timbre of a woman who had spent 5 years defending dissertations in the hallowed halls of the Sorbonne. She answered him in French, but it wasn't just French. It was an exquisite, fluid, high Parisian dialect, enunciated with a precision that made Harrison's attempt sound like a toddler banging on a piano. "Monsieur," she began, her voice carrying smoothly over the low hum of the dining room. "Si vous souhaitez employer le subjonctif imparfait pour m'impressionner, je vous suggère de revoir vos conjugaisons. Votre demande pour le canard est notée bien que comparer sa peau à du verre soit une métaphore quelque peu maladroite, généralement réservée à la mauvaise poésie du XIXe siècle." Translation. "Sir, if you wish to use the imperfect subjunctive to impress me, I suggest you review your conjugations. Your request for the duck is noted, although comparing its skin to glass is a somewhat clumsy metaphor, generally reserved for bad 19th century poetry." Harrison froze. The fork he was holding hovered halfway to his mouth. His mouth hung slightly open. He understood perhaps half of what she said, but the tone, the undeniable crushing weight of intellectual superiority was universal. Sarah wasn't finished. She turned her gaze to the wine glass he had rejected, her expression shifting to one of polite, academic pity. "Quant au vin," she continued, slowing down slightly as if speaking to a slow child. "Ce n'est pas du vinaigre. C'est un Château Margaux 2015. L'acidité que vous détectez est la signature des tanins jeunes qui demandent un palais éduqué pour être apprécié. Si cela est trop complexe pour vous, je serais ravi de vous apporter un merlot sucré. Quelque chose de plus simple, pour correspondre à vos goûts." Translation. As for the wine, it is not vinegar. It is a 2015 Chateau Margaux. The acidity you detect is the signature of young tannins which require an educated palate to be appreciated. If that is too complex for you, I would be delighted to bring you a sweet Merlot. Something more simple, to match your tastes. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy, physical silence. At the next table, a silver-haired gentleman lowered his newspaper. The busboy froze with a pitcher of water. Even Henderson, the manager, stopped polishing his menus 20 feet away, sensing a disturbance in the force field of the dining room. Harrison Sterling's face turned a violent shade of crimson. He looked as though he had been slapped. His brain scrambled to process the reversal. The script had been flipped. He was the master. She was the servant. But in the span of 30 seconds, using the very weapon he had tried to bludgeon her with language, she had stripped him naked. He opened his mouth to retort, to shout, to fire her, but he couldn't find the French words, and switching back to English now would be an admission of defeat. He had started this game. He couldn't suddenly flip the board just because he was losing. Then a sound broke the tension, a short, sharp giggle. It came from Jessica. She clamped a hand over her mouth immediately, her eyes widening in horror at her own reaction. But the damage was done. She looked at Harrison, then at Sarah, and for the first time all night, her eyes were alive. She wasn't looking at a waitress anymore. She was looking at a hero. Harrison sputtered. You. Sarah offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that was terrifyingly polite. She switched back to English effortlessly. I will put the duck in for you, sir, and I'll bring the merlot. I think you'll find it much easier to swallow. She gave a small, distinct nod to Jessica. Mademoiselle, with a pivot that was as sharp as a military turn, Sarah walked away from the table. She didn't hurry. She walked with her head high, the tray tucked under her arm, leaving Harrison Sterling drowning in his own embarrassment, while the ghost of her perfect French lingered in the air like smoke. As she reached the safety of the service corridor, the adrenaline that had held her upright suddenly vanished. Her knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of the granite counter at the service station, her breath coming in short, jagged gasps. Her hands were shaking so hard, the empty wine glasses on her tray rattled against each other. What have I done? The thought crashed into her mind. I just insulted a VIP. I just humiliated a man who could buy this building. I'm going to be fired. I'm going to lose the apartment. Dad's medication. The reality of her financial precariousness came rushing back colder and harsher than before. Pride didn't pay the bills. Superior conjugation didn't cover the copay for physical therapy. Bennett? The voice was a low growl. It was Charles Henderson. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut for a second, then turned around. Henderson was standing there, his face pale, his eyes darting toward table 1, where Harrison was currently aggressively typing on his phone. What? Henderson hissed, leaning in close so the other staff wouldn't hear. Did you say to him? He ordered in French, Charles, Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. I replied in French. I don't speak French, Bennett, but I know the tone of an insult when I hear it. That man is worth $400 million. He brings clients here 3 times a week. Henderson ran a hand through his thinning hair. Did you curse at him? No, Sarah said. I corrected his grammar, and I told him the wine was too complex for him. Henderson stared at her. For a second, a flicker of admiration crossed his face. He hated Harrison too, but it was quickly extinguished by fear. You have a death wish, Henderson whispered. Stay in the back. Don't go to that table again. Send Kevin. If Sterling demands to see me, you're done. You understand I can't save you if he decides to make this a war. I understand, Sarah whispered. Go to the prep kitchen. Polish silverware. Stay out of sight. Sarah nodded and retreated through the swinging doors into the clamor of the main kitchen. The heat hit her like a physical blow. Pans were searing, chefs were shouting orders, steam rose in thick clouds. It was chaos, but it was honest chaos. She found a corner near the dish pit, grabbed a basket of forks and a polishing cloth. As she scrubbed the water spots off the metal, her mind drifted back 3 years, to a life that felt like it belonged to a different person entirely. To understand why Sarah Bennett, a genius linguist, was polishing forks in a basement in Manhattan, one had to understand the fall. 3 years ago, Sarah was sitting in a cafe in the 6th arrondissement of Paris. The table was covered in books, Chomsky, Derrida, Foucault. She was 23, on a full scholarship, the darling of the linguistics department. She had a future that shimmered like gold. There were talks of a tenure-track position in Geneva, or perhaps a research grant in Tokyo. She spoke 4 languages fluently and could read 3 dead ones. She was happy. She was safe. Then the phone rang. It was her neighbor from back home in Ohio, Mrs. Gable. "Sarah, honey, it's your dad. You need to come home. It's bad." Her father, Thomas Bennett, was a carpenter. A strong, quiet man who had raised Sarah alone after her mother died when she was 6. He had worked double shifts sanding floors and building cabinets to pay for her undergraduate degree. He had never understood her obsession with languages. He was a man of few words himself, but he had looked at her with such fierce, beaming pride when she got into the Sorbonne. "My girl," he'd tell his drinking buddies at the local bar, "is gonna be a doctor. Not the kind that gives shots, the kind that knows things." The stroke had been massive. It happened on a job site. He had fallen from a ladder. When Sarah arrived at the hospital in Ohio, still carrying her suitcase with the Paris luggage tag, the doctor had been blunt. Thomas survived, but the damage was extensive. He was paralyzed on his right side. He had aphasia, the cruelest irony. The man who had worked so his daughter could master language had lost his own ability to speak. And then came the bills. Thomas had let his insurance lapse to help pay for Sarah's flight to France the previous year. The ladder fall was deemed negligence by the company he was contracting for. They denied liability. The American healthcare system did not care about Sarah's PhD. It did not care about her potential. It cared about the $40,000 needed for the initial surgery, the $3,000 a month for the rehabilitation facility, the cost of medications. Sarah made the choice in a heartbeat. There was no other option. She couldn't leave him in a state facility where the nurses were overworked and the sheets were thin. He was her dad. She withdrew from the Sorbonne. She sold her books. She moved him to a specialized facility in upstate New York where the care was good, but the price was astronomical. She moved to the city to find work. Academia didn't pay fast money. Waiting tables at high-end restaurants did. If you hustled, if you worked the double shifts, if you tolerated the abuse of the rich, you could clear $6,000 a month. Every cent went to the dad fund. She lived in a closet-sized apartment in Queens with 2 roommates. She ate ramen. She walked to save subway fare. She stopped reading because it hurt too much to remember what she had lost. And tonight, Harrison Sterling had looked at her and seen a 0. He had seen a peasant. Sarah scrubbed a fork so hard her knuckle turned white. The anger was a cold stone in her chest. It wasn't just about the insult. It was about the injustice. Harrison Sterling had likely never worked a physical day in his life. He moved money around on a screen. He destroyed companies for sport. And he had the audacity to judge her Sarah. A soft voice broke her reverie. It was Kevin, the teenage busboy. He looked terrified. "What is it, Kevin?" Sarah asked, not looking up. "Table 1, Kevin squeaked. "The guy, Mr. Sterling. He's asking for the manager. And he's asking for you. He says you stole his credit card." Sarah dropped the fork. It clattered loudly onto the stainless steel table. He's shouting." Kevin said, his eyes wide. "He says he left his black card on the table when he went to the restroom, and now it's gone. He says you're the only one who was near the table. He's calling the police. Sarah." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. It was a lie. A vicious, petty, calculated lie. Harrison knew he couldn't get her fired for correcting his French that would make him look weak. But theft was a career ender. Theft was a criminal record. Theft would mean losing her job, and if she lost her job, her father would be evicted from the care home within 30 days. Harrison wasn't just trying to humiliate her anymore. He was trying to destroy her. "Where is Henderson?" Sarah asked, untying her apron. "He's out there. He's trying to calm him down. But Sterling is screaming. He's making a huge scene. Everyone is filming it. Sarah closed her eyes. She took a deep breath. She thought of her father's face, the way he looked at her when he couldn't find the words. He taught her to be strong. He taught her that the truth was the only thing that mattered. She couldn't hide in the kitchen. If she hid, she looked guilty. "Okay," Sarah said. Her voice was surprisingly steady. She smoothed her hair. She straightened her blouse. She picked up her apron and retied it tighter this time. It was battle armor. "I'm coming out," she said. She pushed through the swinging doors, leaving the steam and noise of the kitchen behind, and stepped back into the cool, treacherous air of the dining room. The scene was worse than she imagined. Harrison Sterling was standing in the middle of the restaurant, his face twisted in a performance of righteous indignation. He was pointing a finger at Henderson, who looked like he was about to faint. Jessica was sitting at the table, her head in her hands, looking mortified. "I want her arrested!" Harrison bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "I leave my card on the table for 2 minutes, and the help decides to give herself a bonus. This place is a den of thieves. I will have this place shut down." He spotted Sarah emerging from the kitchen. A predator's grin flashed across his face. He pointed a manicured finger directly at her heart. "There she is," Harrison shouted. "The thief, search her." "She probably has it in her pocket right now." Every eye in the restaurant turned to Sarah. The wealthy patrons, the tourists, the staff. Phones were raised, recording the spectacle. Sarah walked forward. She didn't look at the phones. She didn't look at Henderson. She looked directly at Harrison. She stopped 5 feet away from him. "I did not take your card, Mr. Sterling," Sarah said calmly. "And you know that." "Oh, I know it." Harrison laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You're a waitress. You're desperate. I saw your shoes. I saw the way you looked at my watch. You people are all the same. You think the world owes you something because you failed at life." He took a step closer, invading her personal space. "Empty your pockets, now, or I call the NYPD and they strip search you in the back of a squad car. Your choice, sweetheart." The room was deadly silent. This was the precipice. If she emptied her pockets, she submitted to his power. If she refused, the police would come. But Harrison had made a mistake. In his arrogance, he had forgotten one crucial variable. He had assumed that because Sarah was a waitress, she was alone. He assumed she had no allies. He assumed that in this room of wealth and power, Wane was the only voice that mattered. He was wrong. From the corner table, table 4. The quiet table in the shadows, a chair scraped loudly against the floor. The silver-haired gentleman who had been reading the newspaper stood up. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, wearing a tweed jacket that looked worn but expensive. He had been nursing a single glass of cognac for an hour, watching, listening. He walked toward the commotion. He didn't walk with the aggressive swagger of Harrison. He walked with the slow, terrifying authority of a man who owned the ground he stood on. "That will be enough, Mr. Sterling," the man said. His voice was low, gravelly, and carried an accent that was unmistakably European. Harrison spun around. "Who the hell are you?" "Mind your own business, Grandpa. This is between me and the thief." The older man stopped. He looked at Harrison with an expression of profound boredom. Then he looked at Sarah. He offered her a slight bow of his head. "I believe," the man said, turning back to Harrison, "that you are the one who is confused. And I believe that if you check the inside pocket of your jacket, the left one which you patted nervously when you stood up to start this charade, you will find your American Express card." Harrison froze. His hand twitched. He fought the urge to check the pocket. "You're crazy," Harrison sneered. "I didn't put it in my pocket." "Check it," the older man commanded. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. Harrison hesitated. The pressure of the room was shifting. The cameras were now pointed at him. With a scowl, he jammed his hand into his left interior pocket, purely to prove the old man wrong. His face went slack. He pulled his hand out slowly. Between his fingers was the black titanium card. A gasp went through the room. "Ah," the older man said dryly. "A miracle. It appears the laws of physics have suspended themselves to transport the card from the table to your pocket. Or perhaps you are a liar who attempts to destroy the lives of working women for sport." Harrison's face turned purple. I must have... It was a mistake." "It was not a mistake," Sarah said. Her voice was ice cold. "It was a tactic." Harrison looked around. The crowd was turning. The patrons who had been looking at Sarah with suspicion were now looking at Harrison with disgust. "This service is terrible," Harrison yelled, trying to regain control. "I'm leaving Jessica. Let's go." He turned to grab Jessica's arm. Jessica stood up. She picked up her clutch. She looked at Harrison, then she looked at Sarah. "No," Jessica said. Harrison stopped. "What?" "I said no," Jessica said, her voice shaking, but getting stronger. "I'm not going anywhere with you. You're a monster, Harrison. A small, insecure, pathetic monster." She turned to Sarah. "I'm so sorry. For everything." "Jessica, get in the car." Harrison snarled, his mask completely slipping now. He looked dangerous. "She is not going with you," the older gentleman said, stepping between Harrison and Jessica. "You want to fight me, old man?" Harrison stepped forward, his fists clenched. The older man smiled. It was a wolf's smile. "I do not fight," the man said. "I eviscerate. Tell me, mister. Sterling, you work for Sterling Capital, do you not?" "Yeah, I'm the CEO. What's it to you?" "I am Lucien Valmont," the man said softly. The color didn't just drain from Harrison's face. It vanished. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. "Valmont," Harrison whispered. "As in?" "Valmont International." "The same," the man said. "We are the majority shareholder in the bank that underwrites your hedge fund's leverage. In fact, I believe we hold about 60% of your debt." Harrison began to tremble. Valmont International was a legendary European conglomerate. They were the whales that ate sharks like Harrison for breakfast. "Lucien." "Mr. Valmont," Harrison stammered, his posture collapsing. I didn't know. It's an honor." "Be quiet," Lucien said. He pulled a phone from his pocket. "I am going to make a call to my board in Zurich. I think it is time we called in your loans. All of them. Tonight." "No." Harrison gasped. "No, please. That would bankrupt me." "Corrupt. You can't do that over a dinner dispute." "I can do it because I do not like your character," Lucien said calmly. "And I do not trust my money with men who lack character." Lucien turned to Sarah. "Mademoiselle," Lucien said, "I apologize for the disturbance. And might I add, your analysis of the Chateau Margaux was impeccable. It is indeed the 2015 vintage that requires patience." He turned back to Harrison. "Get out, before I decide to buy your building and evict you from your own home." Harrison looked around. He was alone, defeated. publicly castrated by a man with real power. He didn't say a word. He turned and fled the restaurant, the heavy oak doors slamming behind him. The dining room erupted into applause, but Sarah didn't hear the applause. She was looking at Lucien Valmont. The name rang a bell, not from finance, but from her past. Valmont. Valmont. Suddenly the memory clicked. The Valmont Foundation, the biggest grantor of linguistic grants in Europe. Lucien looked at her, his eyes twinkling. You are Sarah Bennett, are you not? The one who wrote the thesis on semantic drifts in post-revolutionary France. Sarah's mouth fell open. You read my thesis. Read it. Lucien smiled. My dear, I was on the committee that was going to award you the Geneva Fellowship before you vanished. I have been looking for you for 3 years. The applause in l'orangerie eventually faded, replaced by a buzzing electric murmur. The energy in the room had shifted tectonically. 5 minutes ago, Sarah Bennett was a clumsy waitress accused of theft. Now she was the protagonist of a real-life drama that the patrons would be recounting at cocktail parties for weeks. But Sarah couldn't feel the triumph. She felt lightheaded. The adrenaline dump was leaving her trembling her hands, clasping her apron as if it were the only thing holding her upright. Charles Henderson, the manager who had been ready to throw her to the wolves moments ago, suddenly materialized at her elbow. His face was a mask of frantic, sweating obsequiousness. Sarah. My God, Sarah. Henderson whispered, his voice pitching high with nerves. That was incredible. I had no idea you knew Mr. Valmont. Why didn't you tell me? I would have treated this whole situation differently. Sarah slowly turned her head to look at him. She saw him for what he was, a weather vane spinning whichever way the wind of power blew. You were going to fire me, Charles, she said softly. You were going to let the police take me. No. I was just de-escalating. Henderson stammered, wiping his forehead with a silk handkerchief. It was protocol. But look, take the rest of the night off. Paid. Actually, take the week off. Paid. We value you so much here, Sarah. Go away, Mr. Henderson. A deep voice cut in. Lucien Valmont had not sat back down. He was standing by table 4, his presence commanding the space. He gestured to the empty chair opposite him. Miss Bennett, Lucien said, his tone gentle but firm. Please sit. You have been on your feet for too long, and we have much to discuss. I can't sit with a customer, Sarah said automatically, the rules of the service industry hardwired into her brain. It's against policy. Lucien glanced at Henderson. I am buying this restaurant's debt in the morning along with Mr. Sterling's. I believe I can set the policy. Charles, bring Miss Bennett a glass of water, and perhaps a glass of the vintage she so expertly defended. Henderson scrambled away like a frightened crab. Sarah looked at the chair, then at Lucien's kind-lined face. She untied her apron. It felt like shedding a skin. She sat down. Before Lucien could speak, a shadow fell over the table. Sarah flinched, expecting Harrison to have returned, but it was Jessica. The woman in the red dress looked shaken. Her mascara was slightly smudged, but she looked more human, more real than she had when she walked in. She was clutching her purse with both hands. I just wanted to say, Jessica started, her voice cracking. Thank you, and I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner. When he made fun of your French, I knew it was wrong. I was just scared of him. Sarah looked at Jessica. She saw a woman trapped in the orbit of a narcissist, a woman who had just found her exit ramp. You don't have to apologize, Sarah said. He's a bully. Bullies make everyone afraid. Jessica nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. She reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of cash, what looked like $500. She placed it on the table, then grabbed a napkin and scribbled a number on it. This isn't a tip, Jessica said. This is an apology. And that's my personal number. My father owns a gallery in Chelsea. We need people who understand art and history. If you ever want a job where you don't have to serve jerks like Harrison, call me. Seriously. Jessica looked at Lucy and gave a small, respectful nod and walked out of the restaurant. Her head held high. She took a cab alone, leaving Harrison Sterling's luxury SUV empty at the curb. Sarah stared at the napkin. The world was spinning too fast. A rare thing, Lucien mused, watching Jessica leave. Character is often found in the most unexpected moments. He turned his full attention to Sarah. The playfulness vanished from his eyes, replaced by a sharp, probing intelligence. Now, Sarah, let us speak of the Sorbonne. Sarah took a sip of the water Henderson had nervously placed in front of her. That was a long time ago, Mr. Valmont. 3 years is not a long time, Lucien corrected. Not for a mind like yours. Do you know why I remember your name? Sarah shook her head. I was just a student. There were hundreds of us. No, Lucien smiled. There were hundreds of students. There was only one who wrote The Semantic Architecture of Silence, What is Left Unsaid in Post-Revolutionary Decrees. I read it. I admit I am a financier by trade, but a linguist by passion. My foundation funds 40% of the linguistic anthropology grants in Europe. Your paper, it challenged the established narrative. It was bold. It was brilliant. He leaned forward. We were ready to offer you the Geneva Fellowship. It is the most prestigious grant we have. Fully funded research, a stipend housing in Switzerland. And then, you vanished. The department head said you withdrew due to a family emergency. We tried to contact you, but your French number was disconnected. Sarah looked down at her hands. The shame of her poverty washed over her. I couldn't stay. My father, he had a stroke. I came back to Ohio. The bills, they were impossible. And so you came to New York, Lucien deduced, to make money quickly. The care facility is $6,000 a month, Sarah whispered. The medication is another $1,200. I didn't have a choice. I had to trade the library for the tray. Lucien nodded slowly. He didn't offer pity. He offered understanding. You sacrificed your future for his present. That is a noble thing, Sarah. But it is a tragedy for the academic world. A mind like yours should not be worrying about corkage fees and arrogant hedge fund managers. It's my life now, Sarah said, trying to sound strong. I'm managing. Are you? Lucien gestured to her scuffed shoes, the dark circles under her eyes. You are surviving. You are not living. And you are certainly not utilizing your gifts. He reached into his jacket pocket, the same pocket where he had miraculously produced Harrison's card, and pulled out a business card. It wasn't the flashy foil-stamped card of a banker. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock with simple black typography. The Valmont Foundation, Sarah, Lucien said. I did not come to New York for the food. I came because we are opening a new wing of the foundation here in Manhattan. We are digitizing and translating the private letters of the 18th century French aristocracy, millions of documents that have never been studied. We need a director of archival interpretation. He slid the card across the table. I don't need a manager, Lucien said. I have plenty of those. I need someone who understands the soul of the language. I need someone who can read a letter from 1793 and tell me if the writer was afraid or hopeful based on the conjugation of a verb. I need you. Sarah stared at the card. It felt hot to the touch. Mr. Valmont, she said, her voice trembling. I can't. I can't leave New York. My father is in a facility upstate. I visit him every Sunday, and academic jobs, they don't pay enough. I need the cash tips. I have debt. I have so much debt. Lucien raised an eyebrow. Do you think I would offer you a position that pays less than waitressing? He took a pen from his pocket and wrote a figure on the back of the napkin Jessica had left. He turned it around. It was a salary, a base salary, $185,000 per year. Sarah stopped breathing. That was 3 times what she made here, even on good nights. Plus benefits, Lucien added casually. Full medical, dental, and because the Valmont Group owns a controlling interest in the St. Jude's Neurological Institute in Westchester. He paused, letting the name sink in. Sarah gasped. St. Jude's was the best facility in the country. It was the place the doctors said could actually help her father regain his speech. But they didn't take Medicaid, and the waiting list was 5 years long. I can have your father transferred there by Monday, Lucien said. Covered entirely by the company insurance plan. He will get the best physical and speech therapy in the world. And since the institute is only 40 minutes from the city, you can visit him on Tuesday evenings, as well as Sundays. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. They spilled over, tracking through the cheap concealer. This wasn't just a job offer. This was a lifeline. This was the end of the drowning. Why, she choked out. Why would you do this for me? Lucien leaned back, his expression serious. Because tonight, you stood up to a man who thought his money made him a god, Lucien said. You used your mind as a sword. You reminded me that dignity cannot be bought. I invest in people, Sarah, and I am betting on you. He stood up. Report to the address on that card Monday morning at 9 a.m. Wear comfortable shoes. We have a lot of reading to do. 6 months later. The library of the Valmont Foundation in Manhattan was a sanctuary of silence and light. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams that filtered through the high windows, illuminating rows of ancient leather-bound manuscripts. Sarah Bennett sat at a large mahogany desk, wearing a blazer that fit perfectly and shoes that didn't hurt. She was examining a faded letter from 1794, using a magnifying glass to decipher the looping, frantic script of a French countess awaiting trial. Director Bennett. Sarah looked up. It was her assistant, a bright young grad student from Columbia named David. Yes, David. We have the translation for the De Mercy letters ready for your review. And there's a visitor for you in the lobby. He says he knows you. Sarah frowned. Did he give a name? No, but he's in a wheelchair. He's with a nurse. Sarah's heart leapt. She stood up, abandoning the 18th century for the present, and walked quickly out of the office, down the hallway, and into the glass-walled lobby. There, sitting in a sleek, motorized wheelchair, was Thomas Bennett. He looked different. The grey pallor of the state facility was gone, replaced by a healthy flush. He was wearing a clean flannel shirt. Beside him stood a nurse from St. Jude's. "Dad," Sarah said, slowing down as she approached him. "Is everything okay? Is it an emergency?" Thomas looked at her. His eyes, once clouded with confusion and frustration, were clear. He lifted his left hand, his good hand, and reached out to her. He took a deep breath. His mouth worked, the muscles straining with effort. He had been doing intensive speech therapy for 5 months. "Sarah," he rasped. The word was rough like gravel, but it was distinct. Sarah froze. It was the first time she had heard him say her name in 3 years. "Dad!" Tears sprang to her eyes. Thomas squeezed her hand. He took another breath. He looked around the lobby at the marble, at the books, at the life his daughter had reclaimed. Then he looked back at her. "Proud," he said. "So too. Proud." Sarah fell to her knees and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his shoulder. She wept not from exhaustion or fear, but from a joy so pure it felt like it might break her. She had gotten her life back. She had gotten her father back. And somewhere in the city, Harrison Sterling was likely shouting at a waiter or checking his stock portfolio as it plummeted forever, chasing a sense of worth he would never find. He had his millions, perhaps. But Sarah had the words. And as she had proven that night at l'Orangerie, words were the only things that truly lasted. And that is how a waitress with a PhD took down a billionaire without raising her voice. It's a reminder that true class isn't about what you wear or what you order. It's about how you treat people. Harrison Sterling learned the hard way that you should never judge a book by its cover, especially when that book can read you in 3 different languages. Sarah didn't just win an argument. She reclaimed her destiny. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold with a side of perfect French, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that knowledge is power. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. What would you have done in Sarah's shoes? Let me know in the comments below.